Are you interested in the health and vitality of your personality? If you are, please listen to the Latin poet Horace, Horace. Swagatham, welcome. Vanakkam, Jai Hind. These days, I have been making a very conscious effort to introduce, especially those who are exclusively trapped in religious enclaves, to various insights into humanity, human personality, the human condition, derived from an assortment of sources other than religions. I do this deliberately in order to correct the widespread, most harmful prejudice and presumption that whatever is outside the enclave of religion, or whatever is beyond the hedge of organized religions, is darkness and error. Nothing can be farther from truth than this. Very, very valuable insights into the reality that pertains to the human predicament on planet Earth can be derived from all sorts of knowledge and human endeavor. One such field of human endeavor is literature. It has been my privilege to work in the field of English literature, but anyone who has made even a feeble attempt to teach literature at the higher levels will also know that you cannot abstract one tradition of literature from all the rest. Indeed, you cannot abstract literature from other branches of human knowledge and awareness. After all, ultimately, all of human endeavors pertain to the human condition and the very special status, privilege of being human, and therefore, in everything that pertains to the human condition, everything else is also involved. But let me not go into these generalities, but invite you now very specifically to two insights I have derived from that wonderful Latin poet Horace. And I'll confine myself exclusively to these insights without drawing any sustenance from his body of literature, because that may not be common to everyone. Whereas the ideas derived from Horace can be understood by anyone, whether that person is of the literary bent of mind or not. What are those two insights that I value particularly from Horace? Let me state them like bullet points right to the beginning, and then I'll take up each one of them, just two of them, very easy to remember for discussions thereafter. The first thing, very interestingly, the first thing that Horace says is, in his own words, beware of friends. Beware of friends. Be very careful about your friends. There are, of course, many reasons for this, and this is not an attempt on my part to be exhaustive in dealing with this insight, but I'll give you some hints so that you can continue to build on these thoughts. There are two possibilities in the human condition. One is friend, the other is enemy. The human tendency universally is to hate one's enemy and to latch on to one's friend. Horace says exactly the opposite. By the way, Jesus also said the same thing. He said, love your enemies. It's somewhat different on the face of it from what Horace said, but actually it is quite similar if you look at the ideas involved or the experiences involved. Horace says, beware of your friends. In other words, don't remain stuck to your friends. Now let's examine the logic underlying this very interesting exhortation or this very valuable piece of advice. First of all, please remember that all your enemies were once friends. It is friendship that turns into enmity. It was Soren Kierkegaard, the Dutch philosopher, who opened my eyes to this, where he says, hate is nothing but ruined love. R-U-I-N-E-D, ruined love. If occasionally I pause to give spellings, it's because I'm aware of my limitations at my age in pronouncing words clearly enough. I'm also aware of the fact that since I hail from the vernacular tradition of education, my English pronunciation is far from perfect. And therefore, if I feel that certain words are crucial for our discussion, I take the liberty to spell the word concerned or the words concerned so that nothing is missed in the process. So Soren Kierkegaard, the Dutch philosopher, said that enmity or hatred is nothing but ruined love. That is to say, only if love pre-exists can enmity or hatred come into being. So as you enter into a friendship, you must always reckon the possibility that tomorrow, if not today, day after tomorrow, if not tomorrow, this could turn into some form of enmity. But that's not the main point that Horace is making. The main point that Horace, the poet, is making is that your friends become the limitations of your personal growth. How does that happen? As it is commonly understood, a person who is friends with you is one who makes you feel at home, one who makes you feel comfortable with himself or herself, which usually means, in practical terms, one who agrees with you all the time or who does not disagree with whatever you are saying, even if that person is inwardly convinced that whatever you are saying is not exactly right. That person keeps quiet or endorses it explicitly for fear that if the truth is spoken to you, he or she might lose your friendship. And if a person adopts that attitude to you, you will never get through that person, no matter how wonderful your friendship is. You will never get through that person an opportunity to correct yourself or to know the limitations that you suffer from at the present moment, which then becomes the logic of the complacency in which you languish. Your growth is possible only if you are with those people who are honest enough to disagree on facts, on principle, based on their understanding of truth and reality, so that in an affectionate and well-meaning way, they provide to you an opportunity as well as an awareness to go further than where you have reached. Human life being so inexhaustible in its scope and possibilities, no human being on planet Earth would ever assume or can ever assume in truth and honesty that that person has finally arrived. In this context, I'm reminded of the wonderful words of the great German thinker, man of letters, poet, philosopher, Goethe, Goethe, often mispronounced in the Indian context. Actually, the correct German pronunciation is Goethe. Goethe. Almost 99% of Malayalis pronounce it as Gatha. Gatha in Hindi is a donkey. And this great genius of a man is anything but a donkey. Therefore, I would plead with my fellow Malus not to abuse this great genius who belongs to the whole of humanity. And therefore, I too have a sense of kinship with him by mispronouncing his name. Now, what did he say? He said, the more I know, the more aware I become of what remains to be known. The more I know, the more aware I become of what remains to be known. That's what is called intellectual humility. Now, for you to cultivate this blessed state of intellectual humility, you need honest friends. But unfortunately, such honest friends are very few and far between. Rather, especially in our times, when the culture of shallowness and calculated dishonesty rules roost, uh, honesty in friendship is considered an eminently dispensable characteristic. Therefore, nobody endeavors to be honest within the framework of friendship. And therefore, a friend becomes a flatterer. And there is no greater liability to your personal growth towards perfection than a friend who degenerates into a flatterer. What you need really, if you're interested in your growth and development towards perfection, is somebody who will be brutally honest with you and keeps you constantly aware of the miles that you still have to walk. As Robert Frost said, the miles to go before I sleep. The miles to go before I sleep. We cannot tarry here. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. How does a person become aware of the fact that he has miles to go before he sleeps? Only through friends whom you are likely to mistake as your enemies. Now, here let me be a little autobiographical. As I review my fairly long life, a bit too long, I'm afraid, 75 years on planet Earth, I can tell you with all honesty that far more than my friends, far greater good has been done to me, unwittingly, of course, by enemies, by my critics, even perverse and malevolent critics, because they provided the spur, the impulsion I needed to go forward and make myself better informed, more clearer in my thinking, and more adequate in the fund of my knowledge. So this is the reason why we have to be careful about our friends. A third reason why we need to be careful about our friends is that people who do not understand the philosophical and spiritual discipline of friendship will use friendship to manipulate and control you. It's a terrible thing. Take, for example, drug addiction. Recruits to addiction are often won through cultivated and devious friendships. A person who wants to trap you in the dark den of drug addiction would first make friends with you. His or her intentions are less than honorable. They're diabolic. So again, friendship becomes the bait that you unwittingly swallow, and you end up with something hard tugging at your throat. So be careful, be careful. But it's not enough that you remain careful of your friends. To complete the picture, as Jesus said, you must become more open to those you consider to be your enemies. The truth of the matter is that many more genuine well-wishers of yours may be counted among the people you consider today to be your enemies, because they became your enemies in your sight because they told the truth to you in the past, and you were not mature enough, prudent enough, wise enough to recognize their good intentions. It's been my privilege to earn a mountain of enmity of this kind, so I can speak with authority on the subject. It's a very dangerous thing to advise a foolhardy person. The moment you tell him or her the truth, the first reaction is virulently negative, and that person takes you to be his or her enemy. So all these are practical things. Please continue to reflect more on this. I'm sure there are many more aspects to this to be thought of. So the first advice that Horace, the Latin poet, gives to all of us, especially to those who are interested in the health, dynamism, and vitality of one's personality: beware of friends. They could be your greatest stumbling block. They could be a snare. They could be a real problem. The second advice that Horace gives is dare to know. Dare to know. Very easy, right? beware of friends. 3 words, beware of friends. Again, 3 words, dare to know. The quality of your personality, I'm sure you know this. The quality of your personality is directly proportionate not merely to the quantity of your knowledge, but also to the quality of your knowledge. Now, here let me make a very brief reference to Socrates, who, as you know, is an unfailing source of inspiration to me. Socrates said that you never understand something unless you understand. Please forgive my phone. I cannot reach out to the phone and cut it off. So Socrates said, "You never understand something unless you understand it." What did he mean? It's a typical Socratic statement. It means, in order to know something, you have to stand under it. In other words, you have to turn that knowledge into experience. Precisely what Jesus said a few centuries after Socrates, towards the culmination of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, not he who hears these words of mine, but he who hears these words of mine, but also does them, is like the wise man who built his house upon the rock. So the importance of knowing in the proper sense of the word. Most of the people these days cultivate the quiz competition type of knowledge, mere familiarity with the superficial aspects of various branches of knowledge. That's of no use whatsoever. It's like carrying a ton of garbage on your head. Real knowledge is different. Real knowledge is that which imparts light to your personality. And someone who understood this very beautifully was Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the world famous network of brilliant, outstanding education institutions, where he said that genuine knowledge leads you closer and closer to God. Genuine knowledge leads you to God. So that's a yardstick by which we have to measure knowledge. So dare to know. Now, in modern times, of course, as Oswald Spengler, in that pace-setting book published in 1936, The Decline of the West, points out, the modern age, the modern culture is a culture that's in love with shallowness. And therefore, it's afraid of anything that pertains to the depth. He says the modern man is in flight from the depth of things. So therefore, the knowledge that he cultivates is perforce familiarity with the superficies of things, the outward aspects of everything. He lacks inner and in-depth knowledge. Therefore, the kind of information that we gather proves to be of no use when life puts us to the test. So when Horace talks or recommends to us that we should dare to know, what he means really is that we should dare to know the deep structure of truth, the enduring aspects of truth, the eternal truth, rather than get lost among the flotsam of dated information, periodic truth, or various fashions in knowing that come and go, waxing and waning like the moon, as Shakespeare says. So, knowledge, increase your knowledge. This is why through this channel, which I rarely consider a channel, I try to encourage people to read. I'm sure many of you do not need any encouragement from me, but there may be a few. It's a great pity if we do not set apart a certain amount of time without any excuse every day to reading, but not reading of any kind, reading real deep stuff. And I try to read these days more and more of classics because whatever is happening around me breaks my heart. And in order to reinforce and strengthen my inner core, I need to be in communion with the deep structure of thought. And I don't find anything better than the classics. But of course, it takes a little bit of intellectual rigor to feel at home among the classics, but it's something that can be easily cultivated. Therefore, let's come back to the advice of Horace: dare to know. Now, here I have to point out the religion becomes a huge stumbling block. For God's sake, please realize this, because through centuries, every religion has this problem, tends to discourage its adherents, believers, from reading, knowing, exploring. And that comes of intellectual insecurity. And the reason why every religious establishment is riddled with this burden of intellectual insecurity is the religion is based on the distant past. And that world is long since gone with the wind, as Margaret Mitchell would say, is the title of her classic novel, Gone with the Wind. But we are living in the 21st century. And therefore, insofar as we have come a long way from the period, the prehistoric times when religions came into existence, the keepers, the custodians of religion live in a state of paranoia. That if people go forward and find out newer and greater and deeper and higher aspects of the human condition, the truth that pertains to the human plight on planet Earth, the antiquated system will crumble and they'll be left high and dry. So please understand that it's out of their vested interest that they try to imprison their followers in this dungeon of ignorance and mental darkness. That is the reason why the more religious and pious you are, the poorer you become in your personality. I have interacted with thousands and thousands of deeply religious people, and I have found all of them A, highly irrational. B, I have found all of them murderously selfish. C, I have found them so intellectually insecure that if any theme or idea, even a scriptural reference, is discussed in terms of historical truth, they will stop their ears with both fingers and run away from there. I don't blame them, because that's the hard wiring, that's the conditioning they have received through their religious influence. This is how they understand their piety. This is such a terrible problem as far as personality formation is concerned. Fortunately, younger people in this generation are beginning to understand it far better than their predecessors ever did. And therefore, there is good ground to believe that this situation will improve, and the kind of antiquarian, prehistoric, irrational conditioning that has been undertaken under the auspices of religion will come to a halt. And people will therefore shift from this very shaky foundation of religion to the enduring foundation of spirituality, where every human being stands before his Creator, enveloped in truth, love, compassion, fellow feeling, and the freedom that arises out of all of this. The real heart of spirituality is the human thirst for perfection. That's why Jesus said, be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. But a day in which you remember the two exhortations given by Horace. Beware of friends. Second, dare to know. Thank you.